All right, so on the stuff I found interesting this week, we've got two topics, both of which I think are quite interesting. So the first one was an interview that I listened to on the Joe Rogan Experience, which is one of the biggest podcasts in the world. And what Joe Rogan does, he has a wide range of people on his podcast from every kind of walk of life and lots of different kind of places and occupations and people and whatnot. And this particular episode was with a guy called Daryl Davis, who is a musician by trade and kind of a semi-musician. He kind of not famous at all, but kind of plays in a lot of bars in the US and has made a semi-living making music. But what's most important and why the story is so powerful is that he is a black man who has single-handedly converted over 200 members of the Ku Klux Klan to leave the Klan and change their ideological views.
Wow.
Right, so when you hear that statement, it sounds crazy and it sounds incredible. And when you listen to, so I listened to just like a 3-hour conversation with the guy, and he explains like how he thought about doing this. And it was never kind of a life's mission of his. He just kind of found himself in a circumstance where he got to meet with the leader of the KKK at that time, and saw an opportunity to try and make a change. And it's a wonderful conversation. And so I thought I'd recap it a little and chat about it a little bit, Chad, as to what it takes to change someone's mind if someone has this ideological view that's obviously horrible. Something like the KKK is a horrible viewpoint. And so basically what he says was, he kind of operated from the context of, how can you hate me if you don't know me? Right? So the idea of the KKK is that they think that black people and people of color are a different species to white people and are inferior by nature, and therefore we shouldn't even give them anything. We should really like hate them in a way.
Yeah.
And he was confused as a child how you could hate somebody if you didn't know them. How could you hate them just because they look a certain way, because they have a certain color of skin, right? And so in order to like use that concept, he decided that if he got to know these people, they wouldn't hate him, because they'd find out he's a good guy, he's decent, he's well-read, he's kind of intelligent and all these things, and maybe he could change minds by getting to know them. So instead of going under this like defensive mindset of like fighting this hypocrisy and fighting this injustice and trying to fight against this kind of ideological viewpoint, he tried to make friends with these people. And like genuine friends. So he went through a process of making friends with these guys over a period of years. So for example, the leader of the Klan, who he convinced to leave the Klan about, I think, 6 or 7 years ago, it took him like 8 or 9 years of friendship to change this guy's mind. So how he managed to do it was he kind of tricked him into coming to do an interview with him, because he was writing a book on the KKK at the time, from a black man's perspective, which was quite interesting. Yeah. And he convinced him to come and do an interview without telling him he was black. And so the guy arrived at the interview with his bodyguard and walked into the room and then saw the interviewer was black. And kind of weaseled his way into the interview and spent 2 or 3 hours talking with the guy in a very, very tense situation, because obviously it's not a good look for if you're in the KKK and you're talking to a black person, right?
Sure.
But over that time, he somehow managed to melt this guy, or kind of give this guy an insight that, hold on, maybe these views that I have, which are informed by lots of propaganda and lots of like misreadings of the Bible and lots of literal interpretations of various things, maybe these viewpoints that I have some chinks in the armor.
Yeah.
And what's important from Daryl Davis' perspective is that he didn't judge the guy. He didn't go in there with judgment. All he was trying to do was understand why this guy thought the way that he thought. And once he started digging in without judgment and spent hours and hours and hours with this guy, they became semi-friends and started visiting each other in each other's homes. And the guy would come to watch his music performance. And eventually he started bringing KKK members to the music performances, because he wanted to. He was an amazing pianist and he wanted the guys to see him play piano. And broke these guys down like day by day, year by year, spending years of his life converting a small number of people. It's just a crazy, crazy story. And it speaks to the power of just seeing another human being for what they are, a human being with kind of flaws and insecurities and viewpoints that aren't their own, that they've been given as they grow up, etc. And actually getting to know them as a friend and trying to change their mind through example rather than trying to argue with them. What do you think, Chad?
It's an absolutely fascinating story, and I'm so glad to hear about this. As you said, it doesn't look like he sort of set out to do this as his life's work, but I mean, ultimately, this is a massive feat, and to sort of take somebody down who was the leader of the KKK, who's now, one of his best friends, is a wildly incredible feat. I think the long investment that went into this is also something that's really important, something that we need to think about. Often we, kind of try with one interaction or two interactions and kind of give up straight away. And it's that sort of level of persistence that is required to build a connection with a person. And he's obviously taken that long game over here, which I think is fascinating. I don't know too much about the organization at the moment. Is the organization still going strong? I kind of had the idea that it was something, that happened way back in the past. Is this still a fully fledged, fully functioning organization today?
Yeah, so that's a very debatable one. No one really knows because they don't operate under the KKK anymore because obviously there's the stigma and the connotations of it are so terrible that they've kind of split into various splinter organizations all around the world, and they are very, very small as far as we can tell.
Right.
At the end of the American Civil War, when they were at their strongest, they were at about 8 million members, which at the time was a huge proportion of America, right? It was a huge, huge organization, and it's dwindled over time, and at the moment, our best estimates are somewhere in the tens of thousands, right? So it's much, much smaller than it used to be. But what's important about it is that it still represents an ideal that we want to extinguish from the world, right? It represents a principle and kind of a way of thinking that we want to get rid of. And so this 200 is actually a huge number in proportion to what's left in the organization, right?
Yep.
And the fact that he did it to someone as a leader, and they've got all these weird names for leaders, like dragons and wizards and all these weird and wonderful things. It's the fact that he got to the leadership perspective really does try and cripple this organization. And so, yeah, it is dwindling, but they're still out there. And so it's important that we have these kind of conversations and important that we keep fighting this good battle. I couldn't help thinking about the parallels with South Africa when I was listening to this conversation, right? Because in South Africa, we have our own racial dynamics and we've had our own history and whatnot. And often we try and solve the perils and the implications of apartheid. We want to solve it now. We want to solve it in the next month or in the next year.
Definitely.
And what happens then is people start shouting at each other and get defensive, and therefore we don't have civil discourse. I think what's so important about this story and about what happened in this is that civil discourse is what changes minds. You have to build rapport with someone before you can change their mind. They have to like you. Otherwise, why are they going to listen to you, right? If you come and be rude to me about something I hold very personal and it really means a lot to me, if you're rude to me about it, I shut off completely. And all of a sudden, I'm not listening to you, right?
Definitely.
I want to fight you. If you come and you actually genuinely want to understand my viewpoint, understand why I think the way I think, then you might have a chance of changing my mind because you can start to help me point out flaws in my own behavior, right? So it's not you changing my mind, it's you helping me to change my mind. Does it make sense?
It makes complete sense, and I drew those same parallels. When you kind of mentioned that, it's something that's still very prevalent. You and I, Barry, grew up in the, for all intents and purposes, post-apartheid era. But it's something that's still very, very much there. It's very deeply rooted and, justifiably so, I'd say, for a lot of that anger that's still sitting there. But this is kind of that thing is we can never have that productive conversation because there is just so much emotion on either side. And what is fascinating about this story is that he came in as, kind of dropping all sort of anger from his side, and starting that dialogue and really trying to in a meaningful way, try and get some progress there.
Yeah, one last thing I wanted to bring up before we move on is the fact that one of the interesting side effects of his kind of strategy was his own black friends socially isolated him because they couldn't understand what the hell he was doing, why he was hanging out with these people, right? And so a lot of people were very insulted by the fact that he was hanging out with these people and making friends with these people and whatnot. Sure. And so he actually lived a very lonely life in that time, part of his life, because he was embarked on this journey what he thought was very important, and he kind of felt it was one of the most valuable things he could do on this world. Definitely. But his black friends couldn't understand it because from their perspective it looked really bad. And so not only did he sacrifice that time and all that kind of all the efforts of building those friendships, but he sacrificed a lot of his friends and family as well, which was quite horrifying to hear.
Absolutely. Another interesting thought here is if we look back on our conversation last week in terms of ISIS and those types of terror organizations where there are these ideological views, do you think this type of approach could maybe reap some rewards?
I think it always depends on the case by case basis, right? And you always it's not as easy as just walking up to the guy and starting to make friends with him, right?
Sure.
Because it's just, the world doesn't work like that. I think that where there are opportunities for dialogue, we have to take it seriously, right? So when there is someone who is defected from ISIS or defected from a terror organization and comes into the Western world, and we have a chance to change their mind or a chance to understand what's going on behind the scenes, I think it's important that we deal with it with the right amount of care and the right amount of diplomacy, really.
Yeah.
Instead of just shutting them away and like forgetting about it for the rest of the time. And I think it's the principle of understanding that in order to change a mind or change an ideology, you don't do it by shouting, right?
Yeah.
You do it by actually engaging with that human being and understanding that in their mind, they're the good guy. That's what we struggle to understand sometimes. In
Yep.
their mind, they are the good guy, and what you're saying is the bad guy. And so we have to be empathetic enough to understand that in their brain, something's not functioning the way that our brain is functioning. And the quicker we can figure out what that is, the better chance we have of changing it and actually pushing our society forward, right? So it's not about trying to shut down someone else's idea. It's about understanding why do they have that idea, and then trying to figure out what the right move from there is.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully somebody on his scale will be able to make some changes on that side too.
Across the